Did you know that over 6,000 different people have stood on the summit of Mount Everest? It has become a highway for tourists. Even K2, the Savage Mountain, has seen hundreds of climbers reach the top. But there is a secret list of mountains where the number of successful ascents isn't in the hundreds or the dozens, or even two. It is a singular number, 1. These are the 7,000-meter giants that have been climbed exactly one time in all of human history. We are talking about peaks that open their doors for a single moment and then slam them shut forever. Some are guarded by sugar snow that you can't walk on. Others are hidden in war zones or protected by ancient prophecies. And one was abandoned after elite climbers found a bear hunting them in the death zone. Why have these mountains never been climbed again? We are going to start with the most recent mystery to be solved. For years, a mountain called Muchu Chhish was the holy grail of modern climbing. Standing at 7,453 meters in the Karakoram range of Pakistan, it held the title of the highest unclimbed mountain in the world that was actually legal to climb. It wasn't unclimbed because no one tried, it was unclimbed because it is a nightmare. The mountain isn't a nice, neat pyramid. It is a high point on a massive jagged ridge called the Batura Wall. To get there, you have to navigate the Muchu Chhish Glacier, which is a chaotic mess of broken ice. But the real weapon this mountain uses against climbers is the snow itself. Climbers call it sugar snow. It is made of millions of loose ice crystals that refuse to stick together. Imagine trying to climb a vertical wall of sand. That is what it feels like. In 2023, a team from the Czech Republic reached 7,200 meters, just 250 meters from the top. They were stopped cold. They reported tons of mini snowballs that they couldn't dig through or walk on. They had to turn back, defeated by the snow. Most people would have given up. But in July 2024, the Czech team returned. This time, climbers Danek Hak, Radoslav Gro, and Jaroslav Bansky had a new plan. They wouldn't wait for good conditions. They would move fast. They launched a massive push, covering 20 kilometers of distance and climbing nearly 3,700 meters of vertical height. It was brutal. They climbed through endless ice that was as hard as steel. On July 5th, 2024, at 10:20 a.m., they finally did it. They stood on the summit of Muchu Chhish. But the mountain didn't let them go easily. On the way down, a storm hit. They were trapped in zero visibility, stumbling through a maze of crevasses in a frantic escape. They survived, but their story proved why no one else has done it. Muchu Chhish is a miserable, dangerous labyrinth. It has been climbed once, but don't expect a line of tourists anytime soon. If you think sugar snow is scary, wait until you hear about the mountain that threatens to slide apart beneath your feet. Karjiang 1 rises to 7,221 meters on the border between Tibet and Bhutan. For 40 years, it was the fourth highest unclimbed mountain in the world. The reason it stayed unclimbed for so long is terrifying. Slab avalanches. The snow on Karjiang doesn't bond to the rock. It sits there like a loaded trap. In the 1980s and early 2000s, teams from Japan and the Netherlands tried to climb it. They reached the lower peaks, but when they looked at the main summit, they saw the whole face ready to shatter like a sheet of glass. They ran away in fear. For decades, Karjiang sat in silence. It seemed like it would never be climbed. But in August 2024, just a month after Muchu Chhish was solved, a small team of Chinese climbers arrived. Led by Liu Yang, they were looking for a miracle. They found a tiny window. The weather held just long enough for the snow to stabilize. They didn't use a massive army of support. They moved light and fast. They raced up the southwest face, dodging the avalanche zones. They named their route the buzzer beater, a basketball term for a winning shot made just as the game clock expires. On August 13th, 2024, they reached the summit. They didn't stay long. They carefully picked their way back down the dangerous face. This climb was a huge deal because it showed that domestic Chinese climbers are now leading the way in exploration. But the danger hasn't gone away. Karjiang is still a place where the mountain can collapse without warning. It is a one-ascent wonder that demands perfect timing to survive. Now, let's move to a mountain where the danger wasn't the snow, but the human body itself. Saser Kangri 2 East is a 7,518-meter monster in India. It sits right next to the Siachen Glacier, which is known as the highest battlefield on Earth. because of the long war between India and Pakistan. Because of the war, this mountain was closed for decades. It was the second highest unclimbed mountain in the world, simply because no one was allowed to go there. Finally, in 2011, the Indian military gave a special permit to a small team of Americans, Mark Ritchie, Steve Swenson, and Freddie Wilkinson. They didn't climb the easy way. They chose the southwest face, a steep wall of ice and rock that is 1,700 meters tall. It was like climbing a frozen skyscraper. They had to chop small ledges into the ice just to sleep at night. On August 24, 2011, they reached the summit. It was a triumphant moment. But on the descent, things went wrong. Steve Swenson, who was in his late 50s, started to cough. It wasn't a cold. His lungs were failing. He had developed high-altitude pulmonary edema, HAPE. His lungs were filling with fluid, drowning him from the inside. As they rappelled down the icy ropes, Swenson started coughing up pink froth. That is a sign that death is very close. Then, the hallucination started. He looked out at the empty rocks and saw people standing there. He tried to talk to them. He lost his voice completely. He couldn't speak to his partners. He had to write notes on scraps of paper to tell them he was dying. His partners, Mark and Freddie, worked frantically. They lowered him down the wall, pitch after pitch. When they finally reached the glacier, they were still miles from civilization. They used a satellite phone to call for help. What happened next was a miracle. The Indian Air Force sent 2 Cheetah helicopters. These pilots were heroes. They flew higher than their machines were supposed to go. They landed on a tiny patch of snow the climbers had stomped flat. They grabbed Swenson and flew him to a hospital in Leh. He survived, but barely. Saser Kangri 2 was climbed once, but the price was almost a life. No one has dared to go back to that face since. Leaving the war zone, we fly west to the Karakoram Mountains of Pakistan. This is a place of hard rock and jagged skylines. Here stands K6, also known as Baltistan Peak. It rises 7,282 meters into the air. From a distance, it looks like a beautiful white pyramid, but up close, it is a trap. The valleys around K6 are deep and narrow. The walls hang over your head, dropping rocks constantly. The glaciers are described as shattered, meaning they are a chaotic mess of unstable ice blocks. In 1970, a team of young climbers from Austria arrived in Pakistan. They were led by a 24-year-old named Eduard Kobelmuller. The crazy thing is, they didn't even want to climb K6. They had a permit for a different mountain called Malubiting. But when they arrived, the government changed the rules and forced them to go to K6 instead. They were totally unprepared. They had no maps of the route. They had to cross a swollen river on rafts made of inflated goat skins just to get to the mountain. If a raft popped, they would have drowned in the freezing water. When they started climbing, they found the snow was rotten. It collapsed under their feet. Then, the weather turned. A massive storm pinned them down for 2 weeks. The snow buried their tents and snapped their poles. They ran out of food. Most teams would have quit, but these young Austrians were stubborn. On July 17, 1970, the sky cleared for a few hours. 4 men launched a desperate attack. They climbed through the soft snow and reached a final rock wall at 7,000 meters. Kobelmuller had to use special tools to pull himself up the vertical stone. At midday, they stood on the summit. They didn't celebrate. They saw clouds gathering. They rushed down, leaving their ropes behind because they didn't have time to untie them. They barely escaped before the storm swallowed the mountain again. Why has no one repeated this? Because the Austrian route is suicidal. The ice is too broken, and the avalanche risk is too high. Modern climbers look at it and say, no thanks. K6 remains a one-ascent wonder, a testament to a group of kids who got lucky in a place that usually kills. Our next mountain is defined not by ice but by borders. Kula Kangri is a massive 7,538-meter peak. For a long time, mapmakers argued about where it was. Some maps put it in Tibet, others put it in Bhutan. This confusion is what kept it safe. To the people of Bhutan, mountains are the homes of gods. You do not climb on the head of a god. Because of this, climbing is strictly banned in Bhutan. But in the 1980s, the northern side of the mountain was accessible from Tibet. In 1986, a huge expedition organized by Kobe University in Japan and the Chinese Mountaineering Association arrived. This wasn't a small alpine team, it was an army. They had over 40 members. They laid siege to the mountain. They set up camps, fixed kilometers of rope, and slowly marched their way up. On April 21st, 1986, 4 climbers reached the summit. In the days that followed, they put 13 more people on top. It seemed like Kula Kangri was open for business, but then the politics changed. In 1994, Bhutan enforced a strict ban on climbing all peaks higher than 6,000 meters to respect local spiritual beliefs. Even though the climbing route is technically in Tibet, the mountain is too close to the sensitive border. Permits became impossible to get. There was a report of an Austrian team sneaking up for a second ascent in 1994, but it is often disputed or ignored in the records. Today, Kula Kangri sits in silence. The ropes from 1986 have rotted away. It is a mountain returned to the gods, protected by a law that values spirits over sports. Now, let's move to the strangest story of them all. Deep in the eastern Himalayas, there is a peak called Gyala Peri. It is 7,294 meters high and looks like a white fang rising out of the jungle. It sits right next to the deepest river gorge on Earth, the Yarlung Tsangpo Gorge. For a long time, this mountain was a mystery. It is incredibly steep, with walls dropping 3,000 meters straight down. In 1986, a Japanese team decided to try it. They spent 45 days battling constant rain and dangerous river crossings. They fixed 3,000 meters of rope just to stay on the mountain. On October 31st, 1986, 3 climbers, Yasuhiro Hashimoto, Yoshio Ogata, and Hirotaka Imamura, reached the summit. They descended safely, thinking they had conquered the beast. 12 years later, in 1998, a team of elite Spanish climbers from the famous TV show Al Filo de lo Imposible arrived to repeat the climb. They fought their way up the lower slopes through horrible weather. They reached Camp 2 at nearly 6,000 meters. At this altitude, you are entering the approach to the death zone. There are no trees. There is no food. Humans can barely survive. But as the Spanish climbers looked out of their tents into the swirling mist, they saw something moving. It wasn't a yeti. It was a bear. A massive Himalayan brown bear had climbed up from the jungle below. It was walking through the snow at 6,000 meters, inspecting their camp. The climbers were terrified. In the thin air, you can't run. You certainly can't fight a 400-pound predator. They realized that even if the mountain didn't kill them, the wildlife might. They abandoned the expedition immediately. Since that day, no one has touched Gyala Peri. It is guarded by storms, cliffs, and a bear that patrols the high ice. Right across the river from the bear-guarded peak stands its big brother, Namcha Barwa. This mountain is 7,782 meters high. It is the eastern anchor of the entire Himalayan range. The local people in Tibet have a terrifying prophecy about this mountain. They say that one day, Namcha Barwa will fall into the Tsangpo River below and block the water, causing it to flow backward over a mountain pass called the Doshong La. This isn't just a story. The rock here is crumbling and unstable. The mountain is literally falling apart. But the rock isn't the only danger. Namcha Barwa sits in a storm factory. It catches all the warm, wet air from the Indian plains and turns it into massive blizzards. Avalanches here aren't an occasional risk. They are a constant reality. In 1991, a joint team from China and Japan tried to climb it. They were strong and organized, but on October 16th, tragedy struck. One of their best climbers, Hiroshi Onishi, was working high on the ridge. An avalanche swept down and killed him. The team was devastated and retreated. Most people would have walked away forever, but this team was obsessed. They returned the very next year, in 1992. They laid siege to the mountain with military precision. They set up 6 camps and fixed thousands of meters of rope to hold the loose snow together. On October the 30th, 1992, the weather cleared for a tiny window. 11 climbers pushed through the deep snow and stood on the summit. They had conquered the storm factory. But as soon as they came down, the window closed. Since then, the region has been largely closed to foreign climbers for political reasons. The danger of the crumbling slopes and the memory of the 1991 tragedy have kept everyone else away. Namcha Barwa remains climbed only once, a ticking time bomb waiting for the prophecy to come true. Our final mountain is a beautiful phantom. Sangmarmar Sar is 6,949 meters high. Its name means marble peak because it has a strange band of yellow marble rock that cuts across the summit. It looks like a jewel, but it is a deadly jewel. The mountain is incredibly steep. It rises 5,000 meters from the valley floor in a very short distance. This makes the walls vertical and prone to constant rockfall. In 1984, a team from Osaka University in Japan arrived. They were disciplined and tough. They fixed 3,000 meters of rope up the southwest ridge. It was hard, cold work on steep ice. On July 11, 1984, all the climbers reached the top in waves. They stood on the yellow marble band and looked out over the Karakoram. They came down safely, and the mountain went quiet. A few years later, in 1986, a British team led by Alan Pilkington tried to repeat the climb, but they found the conditions had changed. The weather was warm. In the Karakoram, heat is dangerous. It melts the ice that acts as glue for the rocks. The British climbers found themselves in a bowling alley of falling stones. One climber broke his ribs after being hit by a rock. They realized the Japanese route was a death trap in anything but perfect conditions. They retreated. Since 1984, no one has touched the summit. Sangmarmar Sar sits there, a beautiful marble phantom, ignored by the world, guarding its single ascent. So, why are these mountains climbed only once? It's not a coincidence. It's a pattern. Namcha Barwa is falling down. Gyala Peri has bears in the death zone. K6 is a weather trap. Saser Kangri 2 destroys your lungs. Muchu Chhish is made of sugar snow. These mountains allowed humans to pass for one brief moment. The weather held, the ice stayed firm, or the bear looked the other way. But then, the conditions returned to normal. The door closed. We live in a world where we think we can go anywhere. We queue up to stand on Everest. But these lonely peaks prove us wrong. They stand as monuments to the wild, places that were borrowed for a moment but never conquered.